Welcome everyone. The presentation is about to begin. This session will be recorded and will last 60 minutes. Please keep your mic muted during presentation and turn off your web cameras. If you have a question or a comment, enter it into the chat box during the presentation and your question will be addressed by the presenters at the end. All participants in today's event will have access to the recorded version, which will be available within 1 week after the live event. TESOL International Association's Speech, Pronunciation and Listening Interest section is pleased to present this webinar titled Bridging the Gap Between Pronunciation Research and Teaching Practice. Our speakers today are Solen İnceoğlu and Ines Martin. We're very pleased to welcome all of you to this webinar. My name is Sinem Sonsad and I'll be your moderator for today's event. And now it is my pleasure to invite Dr. İnceoğlu and Dr. Martin to present their talk. Welcome you all again.
Okay.
Dr. İnceoğlu and Dr. Martin, you're welcome to share your screen. Thank you so much.
Let me do full screens. Hello, everyone. If you're in Australia like me, good morning. It's 7 a.m. on Friday already. If there's anyone from Turkey in the attendance, I have a Turkish last name, but I'm French. My father is Turkish, so that's why I have this accents. So thank you, Sinem, for the invitation. I'll first give you a quick overview of today's talk. Pronunciation training studies take place in a variety of contexts, each with their own strengths and constraints. And so in the first 20 minutes of the talk, we'll look at the pros and cons of lab, classroom, and online classroom studies, and how effective pronunciation training in one context can inform training in others. And then the second part of the talk, so also about 20 minutes, we'll see how these findings inform teaching practice, and we'll look more particularly at corrected feedback and the importance of perception and variability. So many of the first studies that examined ways to improve learners' L2 pronunciation were conducted under lab conditions. That is, instead of studying an intact language class, researchers recruited learners for their experiments based on certain features, and then trained them under lab conditions. And there are several reasons for that. Most importantly, when recruiting learners for a lab-based study, researcher can enforce inclusion criteria that allow them to investigate particular research questions while removing confounding factors. Also, when we investigate new pronunciation intervention in intact classrooms, it's difficult to tell if the improvement is due to the training or if it's simply a byproduct of regular language instruction, at least when we don't have a control group. So in a lab environment, if learners do not also simultaneously attend language classes outside of the lab, it's likely that the improvement is due to the experimental intervention. And finally, lab environments allow us to use methods that would not be feasible in language settings, classroom settings, such as software, computers in the 90s, and ultrasounds and things like that. So one area of pronunciation instruction that has been investigated almost exclusively in lab environments is high variability phonetic training. HVPT. HVPT refers to perceptual training in which the stimuli are produced by multiple talkers in a varied phonetic context. And research shows that increasing the variability of the input results in greater and more generalizable gains in L2 speech perception. And study also showed that HVPT helps to improve learners' production skills, even in the absence of production training. And studies have been conducted in a wide range of looking at target features. So it would have been difficult to implement this type of methodology in classroom-based experiments, yet the findings from this line of research directly inform classroom pronunciation teaching by demonstrating the importance of included various L2 voices in our language classes in order to allow learners L2 perceptual categories to develop as a first step in helping them improve their production skills. HVPT research is not the only type of research conducted in lab environment. Other studies that also require a control environment have been looking at the role of attention, the effects of audiovisual information on speech perception, and also corrective feedback in speech perception training. So Lee and Lister, 2017, for example, investigated whether different types of corrected feedback have different effects on L2 production skills. And in their experiments, they had several groups. So for instance, when participants were presented with the word ship, they had to select between ship and sheep. In case a participant selected sheep, one group of participants received feedback in the form of no, he or she said ship. So that's the target, that was the target stimulus. Another group of participants received feedback in the form of no, not sheep. A third group received combination feedback. So no, she said ship, not sheep. A fourth group received just visual feedback. So wrong, written on the screen, and they also had a control group who did not receive any training. So then they did a pre-test and post-test analysis, and they found differences in how much the learners benefited from the different types of feedback, specifically including both the wrong and the correct pronunciation in the correction did not lead to significant improvement in production skills, whereas just providing the correct form did. So again, these findings directly inform teaching practice, but it would have been difficult to investigate this research question in a classroom environment. Lab studies have several advantages for the investigation of specific research questions. However, they have one major constraint, and that's the lack of ecological validity compared to classroom studies. To paraphrase Thompson and Derwing, language teachers might be more willing to use methods of pronunciation instruction that have been demonstrated to improve pronunciation in real classroom settings. But again, findings from lab-based studies can inform classroom teaching, and it's important to keep that in mind. So now let's move to classroom settings. So considering that it is more likely for L2 learners to receive pronunciation training in a classroom rather than in a lab, classroom pronunciation studies are highly valuable in terms of generalizability. But conducted classroom-based studies also has challenges, including the loss of control over the research design, institutional constraints that make data collection difficult, and in terms of ethics, having students enroll in the same course but doing different activities may not be acceptable. Despite these challenges, the last 2 decades have seen an ever-increasing number of classroom-based studies conducted in a wide range of areas. Most studies published so far have been conducted in general classrooms, that is when pronunciation is taught alongside other skills. One advantage of these studies is that because they take place in more familiar courses, their pedagogical implications are directly applicable and can be easily adapted across proficiency levels and languages. It's particularly true for studies that look at segmentals, which is the most common focus of pronunciation studies reported in the field in several languages. And also, there's been studies on both segmentals and suprasegmentals, but there's been less work conducted on suprasegmental, despite research showing their importance for intelligibility. And it mirrors observation that teachers focus mostly on segmentals, and it also and that generally teachers lack both the knowledge and the confidence to teach suprasegmentals. There's another type of setting. So courses fully dedicated to pronunciation are less common. This leads to less published research compared to general language courses. There's been research again on segmental, suprasegmental, and both. But an advantage of these studies is that the researchers are often the instructors. So their knowledge of L2 pronunciation research informs their teaching and vice versa. And consequently, researchers have greater flexibility and autonomy to run the study, test innovative technology enhanced techniques, such as Willow 2011, and Vivian is in the audience. But it doesn't mean that these studies are easier to conduct, but simply that the challenges arising during data collection may be more readily overcome if the entire course focuses on pronunciation. Also, just like with lab-based studies, because of the intensive focus on pronunciation, comparison with general classroom settings are not always straightforward, yet many outcomes can inform pedagogical practices. So for instance, Ingalls' study showed that self-monitoring strategies, that is listening and transcription plus annotation, are useful for the development of suprasegmentals. And her study was conducted in an ESL pronunciation course, but can easily be adapted across instructional settings. The higher degree of ecological validity that we find in classroom-based research also enables the exploration of factors related to both the instructional setting and learners and teachers. Classroom-based studies are ideal for the investigation of learner internal variables such as motivation, attitude, aptitude, willingness to communicate, pronunciation awareness. And the last 2 decades have seen more studies examining the effects of explicit instruction, segmental versus suprasegmental based instruction, and form-focused instruction and corrected feedback. So Saito and Lister, 2012, for instance, investigated the extent to which form-focused instruction and corrected feedback can contribute to the development of R by Japanese ESL learners. And they had 2 treatment groups who completed 4 hours of instruction. As you can see, one group also received feedback in the form of recast, and they also had a control group. And all groups completed pre-test and post-test sessions, and acoustic analysis showed that the form-focused instruction plus recast group improved their pronunciation at the control speech level, that is a word and sentence reading task, but also at the spontaneous speech levels, which was a time picture description task. So this suggests that corrected feedback in the form of recast is helpful for learners. Finally, classroom studies contribute to a better understanding of the role that technology can play in pronunciation learning and teaching. Recent studies, for instance, have highlighted the potential benefit of automatic speech recognition for the development of learner autonomy and pronunciation learning. Other studies based on methodology developed in the lab also show promising effects in intact classrooms, such as the use of visual display and also the use of ultrasound imaging. And now I'll stop sharing, and Ines will share her screen.
Thank you, Solène. Yes, okay, then can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you. We're gonna go on then with the online classroom setting. And first, oops, sorry, nope, there we go. First, I want to point out that when we talk about online classrooms or the online classroom setting, we're talking about distance learning. So fully virtual learning, not hybrid classes or flipped classroom or something like that, but the actual distance learning environment. So why do we think that in talking about pronunciation training, do we have to talk about the online classrooms? Well, as for anything in life at the moment, there is a before COVID-19, during COVID-19, and after COVID-19, right? And I think it's interesting to see that even before COVID-19 started last March, there was already a steady rise in online classes. The report we're citing here by Seaman, Allen, and Seaman is commissioned by the Department for Education in the US. So it is only about US numbers, but they are probably representative for other countries too. And what they saw was that even in 2018, 15% of students took all their classes online, so they got an entirely online degree. But maybe even more interestingly, 32% of all higher education students in the US had taken at least one class online. So clearly online classes were already a thing back then. And then of course, the current situation, COVID-19 has forced most universities to deliver at least part of their classes online over the past year. And we don't quite know how that's going to continue after COVID-19. There will be an after COVID-19, right? But there are researchers that predict that we will see more instruction in online classrooms and also in languages, simply because now we've all worked out how to teach with Zoom, how to design activities. We've kind of worked out the kinks. So there is a good chance that this will be highly important for us in the future. Okay, when we then talk about online classroom settings, one possible concern in that environment is the insufficiency of spoken contact. What we mean by insufficiency of spoken contact is simply, first of all, online classes very often have an asynchronous component. So the synchronous class time is usually a little less than it would be in a face-to-face environment. And even if there is a lot of synchronous contact, what is missing is students just turning to each other and talking to each other in the target language, or even the professor walking around talking with the students here and there. So overall, we can really say there is less spoken contact. So what researchers have then asked is, well, is second language oral proficiency affected by this? And there were researchers that have looked at this question as early as 2018 already. And what the three studies that we're citing here did were they compared oral proficiency development between online and face-to-face classes. And very encouragingly, they all found that learners can reach a comparable level of oral skills in the second language. But now importantly, pronunciation skills really are only one aspect of oral proficiency though, right? And these studies only looked, or these studies looked at oral proficiency more generally. But oral proficiency would also be fluency or lexical and semantic accuracy, pausing, hesitation, all of that. So for pronunciation development, more specifically, there's a lot less research done. One study was done by Solène, one study was done by me, and then there's another study by our colleague en Violon-Vigeon. So the first two studies that we're citing here, in YouGlish and the Violon-Vigeon, are a little bit different from the Martin 2020B in that they look at pronunciation classes more specifically. So what Solène mentioned earlier, these third year, in the US at least, they're usually third year classes that are designed to help students improve their speaking skills or even focusing more specifically on pronunciation. My study was then a little bit different in that I looked at a standard online language class and just wanted to see how does pronunciation develop with a standard class. So there was already a curriculum that was well established. It wasn't with a focus on pronunciation. And I want to tell you a little bit about what I found there. So first of all, I want to point out that these were German learners, not ESL learners, but I think this is probably comparable. The learners were absolute beginning learners, so first semester German, and I compared two different groups. The experimental group received computer-assisted pronunciation training over the course of the semester. And I compared that to a control group that did receive German instruction, so they just followed the standard curriculum. They just didn't have a particular pronunciation element in their class. And I tracked them for the course of one semester, so 15 weeks, both for segmentals and supersegmental development. Sorry, anytime I move out. Okay, there were two important things that I found in this. First of all, the learners who received the computer-assisted pronunciation training improved significantly. And I think that's great because that means that we can help our learners in an online environment improve their pronunciation. That's a good thing, right? Also, though, the learners in the control group were delayed in their pronunciation development. And this is somewhat concerning. So in fact, they didn't improve significantly over the course of the semester at all. which now you could say, well, okay, they didn't get or they didn't receive a pronunciation training, so why would they improve? Well, if you go back thinking that these are absolute beginning learners of a language, they receive 15 weeks worth of instruction, we would expect them to still improve. They might be outperformed by the learners who receive targeted pronunciation training, but they should still improve, and they didn't. And with the same materials, I ran a comparison study in the face-to-face environment, and there the control group did improve significantly. They were then just still outperformed by the students that received the computer-assisted pronunciation training. So taken together, this tells us that if we don't teach pronunciation or don't give students the chance for pronunciation training in an online class, there's a good chance their pronunciation is delayed or pronunciation development is delayed. And with that, then we come to our pedagogical implications, which now we've given you 20 minutes worth of background. Now we're going to use it all. Because we believe you're all here today because you believe pronunciation is important, right? And what we've shown you in the past 20 minutes is that there is a lot of research on pronunciation instruction already. But how does all this research then translate into practice? Or even more specifically, how do you benefit from everything that all this research has shown us? And this is what we want to do in the second part. Then now we want to bridge the gap between research and teaching. So we want to show you teaching practices and tools for pronunciation that were developed based on the research principles that we've shown you in the first part. And I want to start by quickly talking about corrective feedback. So Solène has already said that the research suggests that learners need explicit feedback to improve their pronunciation. And she told you more details about how Lee and Lister even showed us how to provide corrective feedback. So that is all wonderful, but what then if you're teaching in an online class and that online class is partially asynchronous and you just don't have a lot of chances to give corrective feedback, or you are in a face-to-face environment, you're teaching in the classroom, but you just don't have enough time in the classroom to correct learners' pronunciation. And this is where a few resources come in that we want to show you now. The first thing I want to show you is Flipgrid. And I was actually going to ask for a show of hands how many people already know Flipgrid, but I see now that very few people have a camera enabled. So I just hope that this is still helpful for you, that not everybody already knows Flipgrid. So let me jump over then to Flipgrid. And I didn't log in on purpose because I wanted to show you that you don't even have to set up an account. You can just log in with your Google credentials. Most people have a Gmail account by now, even if it's just for the Drive and all of that. So very straightforward, kind of nice that Flipgrid is part of Google. This is the organization, and I'll show you this in a minute. But first, I want to show you what the actual thing looks like so you know how it's going to be helpful to you. So what Flipgrid does is it records either audio or video, or you can even write something. So you would leave a prompt for your students. And I'm just going to play you the first 2 seconds of this so you can see what it looks like.
Hallo, bitte stellen Sie sich vor.
Okay, I don't think you need more than that, but you can see you just record yourself with a prompt. You can also just audio record yourself, or you would just type a prompt. I usually combine it. I usually do a video and then also type out the questions that I want my students to respond to. Then, now is where it gets interesting.
Hallo, ich heiße Canon.
So you see now the students respond to the prompt that I recorded. And this is just a perfect chance to give them feedback on their pronunciation, because you can listen to them and you see them. So you see what their mouth does. So that just gives you an extra level for providing them with feedback as compared to just an audio recording. Also, I should say that Flipgrid is extremely user-friendly. I've used this for 2 semesters now, and I didn't have a single student complain about the technology. They can use their phones to record, they can use their laptops, and somehow it just seems to be working, because my students do complain about other things. So I think if it didn't work, they would be complaining. Then really nice. So you have the video with their pronunciation, responding to whatever prompt you gave them. And then you have several options. you would usually record feedback for them, which you could do with video or audio. I often like to do it with video just because then they see my mouth in correcting their German pronunciation, which can be really helpful. For example, if you in German correct the front rounded vowel ü, right? I can say really round your lips. It should look like something like this. Ü. That's just really helpful compared to just audio recording. But if you don't have the bandwidth or something for video, audio works as well. And you can always just type feedback too. What's kind of nice is that as soon as you post your feedback, they immediately receive an email sent by the system to the Gmail account that they registered with. I kind of like that because I don't have to write an email to my entire class and say, hey, the feedback is up. Especially if I do it delayed over the day, you know, do 3 or 4 in the morning, 3 or 4 over lunch, whatever. I think we all get our grading in where we can. But so they know immediately when I've left feedback. You have all sort of privacy settings. So you can set the prompt where only you see the student responses, and then where only the student sees your response. You can make it a class activity where then the students respond to the student's response to your prompt. Sorry, this is many layers, but so here you would see all of these students then responded to this one student's prompt, right? And the nice thing, if you set it public, is you can record a response and give them pronunciation feedback, and with one click also share that to another student. So if you have 2 or 3 students that make the same mistakes, it's just really easy to give them feedback and not have to re-record it all the time. Okay, let me go back to my PowerPoint really quick. Oh, wait, actually, then let me still show you the overview here. This I find really user-friendly too. You can either just create one big course for all your sections, or for grading purposes, I find it a little easier to just set up one section, even if it's the same class, but for each of my sections. The nice thing then is if you record a prompt, which they call topics. So for each new prompt, you would record a new topic. There too, with one click, you can share it to any of the other sections. So if you want to keep it tidy, you know, you just have one for each course you're teaching, but you don't have to do any extra work. Also, I think I should have mentioned that at the very beginning, but Flipgrid is free. And I think that's a big selling point. That's really nice. Okay, since we're not doing questions throughout, I'll keep this open. I can always pull this up again if you have questions about Flipgrid in the very end. And we did plan 20 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, just hold them. We'll get to that. The second thing along those lines that I want to show you is extempore. Extempore is very, very similar to Flipgrid, but with the pricing tab up here, you can see right away you'll have to pay for it. It is currently $10 a month, US dollars that is, unless your institution already has institutional license. So why then, you might ask, would I ever pay for extempore if I can get Flipgrid for free? The neat thing that extempore offers that Flipgrid doesn't have is that it integrates with different learning platforms. So if your university is using Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard, you can directly link it to your gradebook, and you can create assignments that are timed. That is something you cannot do on Flipgrid. So on Flipgrid, I assign something, and then that morning I go in and check which of my students did the homework and give them feedback, right? So there is an advantage to this, but the question is that worth paying $10 a month to you? Either way, 2 great resources that you can use. Okay, let me move back to the PowerPoint and just see if there's anything I didn't mention about Flipgrid. I talked about the privacy settings, video and written feedback. Yeah, I guess I didn't point out in particular that this is great for online and face-to-face environments, but I've used it in both. In face-to-face environments, you can see how this would be a really good homework, and in online environments for the asynchronous parts, also a great resource. Okay, then moving on. Now we've seen ways to give corrective feedback, but also the instructor does not always have time for individualized feedback for all learners, right? We know that from reality. So in that case, One option might be to use peer corrective feedback. Whenever we talk about peer corrective feedback, we hear a lot of hesitations. Hesitations on the part of the students that they believe that the feedback they are getting from a classmate is not as helpful as the feedback they would get from a teacher. But also even on the teacher's behalf, where the teachers think that the student might give incorrect feedback and that would actually hurt the other students. So there is a lot of hesitation, which then makes it important to look at, well, what does the research show about peer corrective feedback? And in fact, the research suggests that it can be as effective as teacher feedback. And I quickly want to tell you about a study that I conducted with my colleague Lisa Zippel from Yale University, because we looked at peer corrective feedback specifically for pronunciation training. And to do so, we had 4 groups that we compared. We had a peer feedback provider and a peer feedback receiver group. So the difference was that the peer feedback provider group only provided feedback and the receivers then only received feedback, as compared to doing both. If you use this in the classroom, maybe then you would the following week just flip them so that each person gets to do each task. We also had a group that received teacher feedback, so very traditional, just the teacher correcting their pronunciation. And we had a control group that simply did not receive feedback on their pronunciation at all. And again, what we found was, first of all, very interestingly, when comparing the peer feedback providers and peer feedback receivers, we saw that the benefits actually seem to stem from providing feedback rather than from receiving it. And that is interesting because that might inform how you design an activity, right? Maybe you just want to take one student recording and have several students provide feedback on that, if that is how the learners are learning. We also found, though, that the peer feedback groups showed similar gains as the teacher feedback group. And that's what addresses this hesitation about peer corrective feedback, right? And I say similar gains here because the peer feedback providers actually outperformed the teacher feedback receivers. But the peer feedback receivers were not quite as good or didn't gain as much as the teacher feedback receivers, but still overall, they all improved significantly. So if that convinced you now and you say, hey, yeah, I would use peer corrective feedback in my classroom, I want to show you what the possible design for a study like that could look like. First of all, we would recommend starting with a very short unit of what we call awareness raising. This could really be a 3-minute presentation in the classroom, but all the hesitation that I've mentioned on the previous slide, it is helpful to address that in the classroom before you talk about, or before you have the students do peer corrective feedback. So you might just tell them about the theoretical background, say, hey, this is why you would benefit from it. And also here's research that has shown that you actually benefit from it, just to kind of set them up a little positively. Then if you can, ideally, you would also give them a short pronunciation training to the entire class. This could be assigned as homework, which is what we did in our study. The reason this is helpful is if you remind students what to pay attention to, when they provide feedback, they will have this in their recent memory, right? So if I teach them the front rounded vowel U, and I very recently told them, remember the lip rounding, then the students providing feedback can hone in to that and say, oh, remember, you're supposed to, round your lips, just to give an example. Okay, then you would have all your students in the class do a recording based on a prompt that you're giving them, even open-ended questions, or maybe a sentence reading task, word reading task, whatever you want them to provide feedback on, of course, depending on the level. What we then did was we divided the class into 2 groups. So we had a peer feedback provider group and a peer feedback receiver group. And each student in the peer feedback provider group would be assigned a pair or partner in the peer feedback receiver group. What the first half of the students did then on the first day was they listened to recordings of the students or of their assigned partner in the peer feedback receiver group, and they gave them feedback. And they did this by recording themselves. So they would say, no, you pronounced that wrong. This should sound like U. Or for the supersegmental level, no, you want to put the stress on this syllable, not on that syllable. So really just giving feedback like their professor would. On the next day then, the feedback receiver group learners would listen to that feedback and then re-record the original recording that they did. And this is where we did find improvement. Okay, and I hope it makes sense how this would also be useful in the face-to-face and the online environment. We actually did all of this in the face-to-face environment, simply assigned as homework. So all the recordings were just on the course management platform where the students can access them and where we could access them. And for the online classroom too, then this is just perfect to do in the asynchronous part, right? Especially if you have 3 or 4 days, you assign the first thing to the students the first day, and then the second part the second day, and that would work really well, we believe. Okay, with that, then I'm turning back over to Solène.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay. So you will recall that at the beginning of the talk, I talked about high variability phonetic training and how it can help establish more robust mental representation of L2 sounds. Do you see my screen? I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, yes, and also how it contributes, HVPT contributes to pronunciation development. Although the HVPT methodology has mainly been associated with lab settings, recent years have seen the emergence of online HVPT resources particularly well suited to classroom settings and also to autonomous learning. So one of these great resources, and many of you might already be familiar with it, is English Accent Coach, developed by Ron Thompson at Brock University in Canada. And English Accent Coach targets the learning of English vowels and consonants with an extensive database of words produced by 30 talkers. So here you have the variability. The training mode is similar to lab experiments. Learners hear a word, a stimulus, and then they click on the symbol for the vowel or the consonants they believe was produced, and then they receive immediate feedback. So let's actually, so it's an excellent way to provide, to assign individualized homework activities. And it's recommended to do 5 to 10 minutes per day rather than one long session once in a while. So a little bit every day. So let's actually have a look at it together. So again, it's englishaccentcoach.com. It is free. The first time you have to register. I'm already registered, so I'll just log in. You can also try as a guest, but it's free, so you can just register. We don't have a lot of time, so I won't go through the whole website. You're more than welcome to have a look at it on your own. Because it uses the International Phonetic Alphabet, for learners who are not familiar with it, there is a little introduction here for the vowels and for the consonants with descriptions and explanations. What we'll do, we'll look at play vowels, which is the HVPT training. And I saw that there was a question about HVPT, so hopefully this will already answer the question. So you can select the number of stimuli, the number of words that you will listen to. 100 is actually a very good number, and it's similar to training experiments also. And you can select the level of difficulty. And the good thing with this is you do not need to master level 1 in order to unlock the other levels. They're already all accessible to everyone. The only difference is the top levels here. As you can see, it's a vowel preceded by easy consonants or consonants that are less challenging, and then it gets more and more challenging. So the R and L, for instance, vowel in a first syllable of a word, so plurisyllabic words, vowel in stressed syllable. So yeah. So let's do with pataka. Those are my favorite vowels, consonants. And then you can also select to train the whole vowel inventory. Or if learners have particular challenges with certain contrasts, they can also decide to just practice this problematic contrast. So for today, we'll just look at all of them, and then you begin the session. And again, so here is the vowel charts, which is also very useful to know that E is a front vowel, U is a back vowel. And so I'm a big fan of IPA. And here, oh, so I didn't pay attention. So let's pretend that it was this one. So that's incorrect. And it tells you the correct answer was this one. And then, oh, that was the same.
T.
And then you click here, and this is correct. So basically, you do that for 100 stimuli, and it gives you, that's the type of training. And as you could hear, it's different voices. So this is really the variability we were talking about earlier. Then the second thing that I wanted to mention is, so the benefits of HVPT is that it introduces learners to a wide range of voices, and thus it helps the formation of more robust representations of L2 sound categories. English accent coach and studies in labs are often targeting segmentals, so vowels or consonants, but it's also important, and it's great, but it's also important to integrate variability in the input at the word and also at the sentence level. So one good tool to do that is YouGlish, YouGlish.com. It's a practical website which indexes videos from YouTube and allows users to search for words or short sentences and listen to them. So one type of activity that you can do, you can use YouGlish as a pronunciation dictionary, and I'll talk, well, in dictionaries, online dictionaries, you can already click and hear, you see the definition, you click, and then you can hear how the word is produced. But it's usually just one example. So it's one person, sometimes it's different dialects, but one person, and the word is produced in isolation. And so this is, that's useful when you just click to know the pronunciation, but it doesn't give you the variability that is needed to develop mental robust representation of the L2 sounds. So you can use YouGlish as a pronunciation dictionary, and it's accessible for learners, to learners of all levels. And many words are present, you will see, we'll look at it together, in over thousands of videos. And so it allows learners to hear words spoken by a wide range of fluent speakers in a variety of contexts. And so one example of activity, teachers could ask beginner learners to search a list of words containing sounds known to be particularly problematic, and have them watch a dozen video examples per word, for instance. So let's have a look at YouGlish together. So as you can see here, it's in English, but it's also available for many other languages. And for English, you can see that you can have the US accent, the UK accent, and the Australian accent. So you just have to type a word. And if we had plenty of time, I would ask for volunteers, but I'll just type one word, albeit because it's a word that until last year I was pronouncing incorrectly. And a nice Australian colleague told me that I was mispronouncing it. So you type, you click.
Into the mindset that you're describing, albeit maybe
So as you can see here, before we go on, I just want to show a few things. First, it's the first video from YouTube with albeit out of more than 2,000. So if we had plenty of time, and for me, it's still, it's not even 8 a.m. So I could spend the whole day watching 2,000 videos containing albeit. So it shows you the wide range of contexts and voices that you can be presented with. Second thing is you can see here captions, and I'll go back to the captions in a second. And you can also rewind a little bit. So if you've missed, or if you want to listen to the same person again.
That propelled activists into the mindset that you're describing, albeit maybe a...
And then you click next.
Yeah, albeit a little strange.
Truth.
albeit in smaller, more localized ways.
People, albeit they are very
albeit on a
So as you can see here, we had access to quite a lot of different voices, which can be very useful. The other type of activity that you can do with the caption, because each video has them, you can use YouGlish as a tool to practice shadowing activities. And shadowing activities is where the students imitate the speakers, either simultaneously or with a slight delay. And some of the speakers might be a bit too fast for lower level students, but it's possible here to decrease the speed of delivery and have students practice in a slower mode before aiming for natural speed. So I'll go back, I'll first decrease maybe to 8, and I'll go back.
found ourselves on the move, albeit on a wooden cement cargo ship sailing.
Okay, so as you can see, that was much slower, and so students could practice and then go back to the normal speed. The other activity that you can do, or that learners can do, especially if, and I forgot to say, so YouGlish is great for perception. So that's the variability at the sentence level. But you can also combine it with production activities. So the shadowing activity is a great activity, but also another type of activity, a production activity, would be to have learners repeating words and then using the next speaker as feedback, in a sense. So basically, let's actually do it here. So you have the first speaker saying albeit, then the students repeat albeit, and then they click on the next video. And then the next speaker, in a sense, provides feedback, because then the learner can compare and contrast their pronunciation with the next person, and so on, and do it a couple of times with maybe like five or six speakers, and then move to another word. So just so that it's clear, I'll just do it here.
Through pirate waters.
Albeit with a different market.
In general, albeit in a specific place.
Albeit frighteningly.
So you do it like this. So I think that's all for now. I'll just, we'll have time for questions. So I'll just show you, those are the references we used today for the talk. And now it's time for questions and comments. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Njolu and Dr. Martin. I'll just direct you some of the questions that we have. So one of them says, would the peer feedback be as successful with students from different L1s?
That's a good question. I don't think there's any research out there, right? That would be a fantastic next study to do. I've seen in the chat there were 1 or 2 responses of people saying they have used it and they had positive outcomes. I personally have never used that, just because I teach at the Naval Academy, which even only lets American citizens in. So I really have no experience with that, but it's a very interesting question.
Okay, thank you so much. And the next question, actually, I will say 2 questions which are related to each other. The very first one was when you were presenting about peer feedback study, how did you measure the improvement? And the other question, which is related to this, in the peer feedback study, how was it determined that the peer feedback providers benefited more than the receivers? What was the assessment criteria?
Yes, so we did this with comprehensibility judgment by native speakers. I think we had an assessment on the word and the sentence level, because these were absolute beginning learners as well. We then took the data to Germany and had it rated by native speakers there. Sorry, what was that was the assessment? What was the second question? Oh, how do we see that the provider?
How do you, yes.
Yeah.
How do you measure the improvement?
So we did that by not flipping it. In the classroom, you would maybe 1 week have the student be a provider and the next week the student being the receiver, right? The same student, but we really only had them be providers or receivers. So if then with the measurements we collected, we saw what their gains were, and we saw that they that the provider group showed the largest gains. The the teacher feedback receivers showed the next level of gains, and then the peer feedback receivers showed a little less, but all three still significantly outperformed the control group.
Thank you so much for the answer. And another question is for Flipgrid, actually. Can you insert feedback in the video just after a pronunciation error in Flipgrid?
Unfortunately, you cannot. That would be really nice, but you can't say where you want to insert it. At least I haven't found out yet where to do that. So no, you have to wait till the student is done and then record it.
And the other platform you introduced, do students have to pay to use that one, or is it only the teacher who has to pay?
No, it is only the teacher.
There's actually two. I think that there are two options. I think they might have changed, but there's also the option to have students buy their subscription, so the teacher doesn't pay. The teacher would not have to pay, but then the students would, just like a textbook, they would purchase the access to extempore. So there are quite a lot of different fees. So everything is explained on the website, but they have different categories.
But there is an option where just the professor pays, which just like Quizlet.
Yeah.
Is there a limit on the number of students you can have in class as the professor? Do you know, like, because you pay for it already?
No.
Okay. All right. So here's another question then. YouGlish is great, but it's limited to more formal contexts like presentations or formal interviews. Do you have a suggestion for a similar app that searches movies, talk shows, or TV shows?
I can't think of anything. No. Especially Ines and I are actually working on French and German. So there might be something for English somewhere that we're not familiar with. I guess there's not a website. I'm not familiar with one, but if someone knows, maybe someone can type in the chat.
I think that would bring some copyright issues. Maybe that's the reason, the movies and shows. Another comment, maybe it might be helpful for some people. It says Flipgrid can also integrate with learning management systems if your institution enables it. You can talk with your institution's IT department, obviously, and this person's university, if a faculty member talked to the IT people, they could just integrate Flipgrid to LMS, learning management system.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that. I actually asked my school, and I guess I would have had to tell them that it is possible rather than ask them, is it possible, right? Because I just got an outright, nope, can't do. But yeah, maybe especially if you teach with Google Classroom, I can see how that would work. We're using Blackboard, and not a lot is compatible with Blackboard, I have to say.
Right. Well, another comment says, well, this is great, online teaching, but students suffer from isolation, like the absence of physical connection. But I guess that's something that we can't really help at this point.
But just anecdotally, my students, when we taught entirely online last year, they told me that they loved Flipgrid because they did get to leave comments then on their on other students' responses, right? So I didn't just use this for pronunciation, I also just used it for speaking practice. And they like then, if they can't see people in real life, to at least see a video and respond to that. And I always made it about content. So when we learned favorites, everybody had to say what their favorite sports is and stuff, and people then respond to that. So yes, they are also isolated, and that is terrible, but then it is nicer for them to do an activity where you respond to a real human that should be in the classroom with you, to at least diminish that isolation a tiny bit.
Yeah, and I think also that it also helps the learners get to know other people in the class that they would not sit with. You know, like when it's face to face, they tend to sit with the same person, and so this type of modality, it really enables students to get to know the whole class and talk and interact with everyone. So yeah, there is silver lining.
Right. Well, any other questions or comments for our wonderful presenters? I will just wait for a few seconds to see if there's any other question. That sometimes people type and it takes time. And
in the
well,
meantime,
thank you so much.
To put the reference for that peer corrective feedback study that was published in the Journal for Second Language Pronunciation. Just
actually, that would be great. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So let me put that in the chat.
Yes, that would be great. Yes. Actually, also maybe we can remind that this presentation is going to be shared as a chapter in a book next year. So if attendees follow you guys, your publications, they will have access to it next year in a book. This is a very nice topic, corrective feedback or online technology stuff to use in pronunciation teaching. That's what everybody needs right now, I guess. Okay, so there we go. We have the reference for the paper for peer corrective feedback. So if you guys want to read more about it, go ahead and check it out. It's in Journal of Second Language Pronunciation, whose editor is with us right now, I guess. Here, kudos to Dr. Levis from here. All right, so thank you so much, Solène and Ines. This was very helpful. I think we all got a lot of ideas about what kind of technology-related materials we can use, and we really needed that help. So I really appreciated it and on behalf of everyone. And many people asked for your PowerPoints and materials, and I would like to remind that this presentation will be available on TESOL's YouTube page in the next couple of days, so you will get a link to the recording. However, if the presenters are okay to share the link of the materials with you, we'll also tell it to TESOL so that they can share them with you. And with that, we must conclude today's online program. Today's presentation was titled Bridging the Gap Between Pronunciation Research and Teaching Practice. And a special thank you to our wonderful presenters, Solène Indioğlu and Ines Martin. And this concludes the program. You may now disconnect.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to reading the chapter 2. Have a great rest of your days.
Thank you. You too. Goodbye.